In any event, I expect this pardon will be a very popular one with the media. After all, turkeys are closely related to vultures. I don't know if I like that line, but there is a little truth to it. But today, after the birds will retire to Gobbler's Rest at Virginia Tech, great college, where they will be cared for and enjoy a terrific life.
They should retire this tradition. We don't need this bizarre pardoning of the turkey thing anymore. I know I'm not trying to be the Thanksgiving Grinch, although I will be the Christmas Grinch because I will tell you all as it gets closer how once you have children who are above the age of 12, I think Christmas gifts, just try 1 year not doing the Christmas gift thing and just spend time together and forget about. But I know people get mad, but stores need it and everything else. People, it's different now, man. You can buy stuff for people. Buy them a gift whenever you want. You don't have to wait until Christmas time to get gifts. You sit there on your phone and order anything you want to order for anybody. But I know it's very, very commercialized, the Christmas holiday is. Thanksgiving is also commercial, at least for grocery stores and everything else. And I'm all down with most of the traditions and the way that we talk about. Well, I feel like they've started to push the whole pilgrim narrative and all that out of it. You know, we don't hear about this so much anymore. And there's some early, some of the earliest settlements had some experiments with socialism and with communal property, believe it or not. And it didn't work out well. What a shock. When people had their own plot of land and they were responsible for that land and also were able to benefit from having it be better tended. I'm talking now about the earliest colonists, the earliest settlers, people that were showing up here wearing those funky shoes with the little buckles on them, look like leprechauns. You know what I mean? Those ones. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The Puritans, Plymouth Rock. They showed up and they had communal ownership of some of the property, and that turned out to not be a good thing. So they started to go, wait a second, maybe we should have ownership of land. I also love the lack of an honest assessment of what went on with native peoples before the European settlers showed up in this country. We always hear that there was no sense of ownership of land. Yeah, and yet there were tribes, notably like the Comanche, among others, that were infamous for going to neighboring tribes and wiping everybody out and taking all their stuff. So I do think they did have a sense of property. They just didn't have a sense of writing, and the rule of law was not codified. But they like to create this mythology of a utopia that existed here before the settlers arrived. As you know, I've talked to you about this in the context of Columbus Day, where the storyline is that everything was great here. And then we showed up and we ruined it, basically. And now we need to be saying, sorry, there was a piece in The Guardian today, the UK paper. Not that anyone really cares what the UK has to say about Thanksgiving, because we're thankful that we don't have to deal with their dumbass monarchy. What a ridiculous. I'm sorry. Not just because of the disgusting Prince Andrew situation, but just in general. So, the monarchy, the Queen, we have to all sit around and bow, and it's for tradition, and they get to just be sort of rich and fancy for no apparent reason. No, we fought a little war, so we did not have to bow and scrape and bend the knee to a bunch of people that have done nothing to deserve the praise they get from the British. But anyway, I might even try to watch some of this. Everyone loves this show, The Crown, which I have to say, I tried. I thought it was very boring. Maybe I'm alone in this one. I couldn't get into it. Different strokes for different folks. Where was I? Oh yes, on the native peoples and the way that Thanksgiving is now. Thanksgiving is considered an imperialist and colonialist holiday in the academy. It hasn't really caught on yet because people do like an excuse to eat a really big, rich meal and to be with their families, and because it's not an explicitly religious holiday, although I think it goes all the way back to George Washington and people giving thanks. And, obviously it goes back even before, but when it was turned into a holiday, an official holiday, you needed to have a country first, right? So it was something that we could do a whole Thanksgiving history perhaps on another day, although I don't know how fascinating that would be for all of you. But the storyline is always that the native peoples in this country, not just in this country, but in North America in general, were living in a state of harmony. And then we came along and we're the exploiters and the oppressors and did all these terrible things. Meanwhile, if you look at the reality of what was happening in the New World, particularly in the context of the Aztecs and the Mayans, there was a system of slavery and exploitation that was going on before we ever arrived, because people are people all over the world. And if you're looking at what was going on in the 15th century, 16th centuries, that people doing bad stuff all over the world. There was no place that was this utopia where everyone lived in harmony with the land. And the one thing that liberals never seem to really understand is that nature is actually quite unforgiving and destructive. And you see this with all the different versions that they put out in pop culture of native peoples living in harmony with the land. I mean, you look at Dances with Wolves, for example. Oh, everything was the Native American tribes there were living in this world of everything was beautiful and they just lived off the land and everything's fine. And then you can even see, the plot of Dances with Wolves is completely taken by the movie. What was the movie with the blue aliens? The blue alien movie. You know what I'm talking about, the blue alien movie.
Avatar?
Avatar. Yeah, I'm going to say it. One of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. And I saw it in the special 3D. Oh, look, the thing is like the weird jellyfish in the sky is flying to my face. No, it was bad. It was not a good movie. And I've been told it's also the same plot from Fern Gully, which I never saw. Is that correct? Fern Gully has the same...
You should watch that.
Really?
Yeah. Maybe it wouldn't work with you because I watched it as a kid. And it's more like a kid's movie, but yeah, it's the same plot.
Same basic plot, right? So the bad people show up, the exploiters and all these things. The reality of Mother Nature is that, especially for societies that were pre-industrial and didn't have even basic agricultural implements or systems of animal husbandry, I believe is the correct term. I'm amazed at how many Americans don't even know that the Native Americans in this country did not have a culture of horseback riding until the European Spanish colonists showed up. That was where they got horses. There was not. We think of the Plains Plains Native Americans. Plains Native Americans. That is the appropriate terminology. But tribes like the Sioux and the I mentioned Comanche before, Apache. That they're riding horses. That was actually something that came as part of the colonial conquest of America. Well, I just think this is a fascinating part of that. That just gets left out. People are like, oh yeah, no, they had horses because of us. But what I'm trying to say about Mother Nature and the way it can be quite brutal is that for those societies, famine was a regular occurrence. People would run out of food. People would freeze to death. People would die because of exposure to the elements. And so there's always this story, this make-believe world that liberals conjure up of pre-European, pre-industrial societies were living in harmony with Mother Nature, when the reality is that they were living at the whim of Mother Nature most of the time. And life was, to borrow from Hobbes, often nasty, brutish, and short. So if we're just going to have these conversations about whether Thanksgiving is a colonial holiday, I think we should be honest about what life was like here beforehand. What ways did it get better? What ways did it not? Obviously, there was a lot of very terrible things that were done to the native peoples by the colonial settlers. Some of the native peoples did some terrible things to the settlers as well. We know about that. It was mostly a function of disease that wiped out the Native American population in this country. I think about the real estimates are over 97% of casualties after the conquest of North America, of the Americas, I should say, came from disease, primarily smallpox and influenza. So we always are told about the genocide that occurred and that we have to constantly be apologizing for this, and that this is something that all Americans should carry some stain of shame over the genocide. There were very bad things that happened. I'm familiar with the different ways that Native peoples were killed and rounded up and put on reservations, but a vast majority of the extinction of Native peoples that occurred in the New World was the result of disease. So it was a highly unfortunate situation for people whose immune systems had not been exposed to disease the way they had in the Western and primarily Mediterranean world. So anyway, I just think that if we're going to talk about the colonial background of Thanksgiving, we should have a more open and honest discussion about, okay, well, what were the good parts of this? What were the bad parts of this? What were the aspects of, we're giving thanks in the New World. Do we have to focus so much in our contemporary context on how things back then weren't? There was no wokeness. There was no social justice. There was a lot of, yes, racism and exploitation and bad things happening. Does that mean we're not allowed to just get together and give thanks today for all the benefits and bounty and wondrous stuff in this land? They really do believe they want to change. I'm trying to see what the name is. I think Trump said that there's an effort to change the name of Thanksgiving and that everyone has freaked out and said that that's not true. Here we go. Universities teach students, here's an example of exactly what I'm talking about, how to decolonize their Thanksgiving. This is in the College Fix. As college students across the nation head home for Thanksgiving, they're armed with the knowledge to decolonize their holiday. Quote, by taking how you can eat your turkey and decolonize Thanksgiving too. That's an event that is happening on college campuses. And thanks but no Thanksgiving, decolonizing an American holiday. This is amazing. There's an article here that they talk about Professor Wick, in which she encouraged parents to send letters to their children's schools to advocate for a more inclusive approach to discussing Thanksgiving. Wick is an assistant professor of history at St. Mary's University. Montana State University is having an indigenous dinner on November 13th, including only locally and tribally sourced foods, with various stations offering natural Native American dishes. So now we have to give thanks by eating the foods of the Native peoples who were here beforehand. How long before we're told that that is cultural appropriation? Anybody? How long before that itself becomes a problem? This is like what I was discussing with you yesterday on the issue of pronouns. They want you to use specific pronouns or to announce your pronouns and also to use specific pronouns. And then when everyone starts announcing their pronouns, if they ever get their way, the problem will be that when people announce their pronouns, some people have to use pronouns that are unexpected. So it doesn't solve any actual problem. It doesn't really make any of this go away. If you celebrate Thanksgiving by having, I don't know, what, maize and squash, and I don't know what the native dishes would be, and it depends on what part of the country, right? But if you were to borrow from the native culture, then you would be guilty of cultural appropriation. So there's really no way to win. These are just people who just want to whine. They just want to complain. They don't want you to just be able to hang out with friends and family and eat way too much, which we're all going to do. Man, I'm going to have to carve out some time. Forget about carving the turkey. I have to carve out some time to get to the gym the day after this, just so I don't feel like one of those bullfrogs where you can't even see its legs when it's sort of like, burp. That's what I feel like after Thanksgiving. I look like a bullfrog where you can't see any of its limbs because it's just kind of spill. It's so gross. It's just kind of spilling out like. Brrr. That's what I'm gonna be like. I was sitting there rubbing my belly. I told my parents have an amazing white French bulldog named Tallulah, and my parents don't live far from me, so I'm able to go visit on a regular basis here in New York City. And the French bulldog, she's amazing. She's a beautiful dog, great dog. French bulldogs. Dana Lash, I believe, I think she has a couple of French bulldogs. She's got great taste in dogs. Frenchies are so cute. They're great for cities. Those of you that have not country houses, but houses in the country. And, yes, if I had 20 acres or whatever, or 2 acres, an acre, if I had more than a couple hundred square feet to live in, I'd probably get a lab or a golden retriever. Oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe a shepherd. A shepherd would be kind of cool. I like Bernese mountain dogs, too, but they're enormous. You feel like you want to put a saddle on them for the kids, but don't do that. That's bad. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, Tallulah. We joked around, though, because she's all white. She's an all-white dog, and she's gotten a little up there in years, and she's gotten a little pudgy in her old age. and I found a photo and I showed it to my little sister. She looks like one of those white fur seals that you'll see. They're just like this mound of blubber on the ice. And that's how they try to hide from the polar bears. Doesn't always work. The Frenchie looks a little bit like that these days. So mom's going to yell at me for making fun of the Frenchie for being fat, but whatever. I don't even know. She's busy cooking. I don't even know if she's going to hear or see this show. So fun things. Give your dog some of the scraps from the table. I think there's even there's a parable in the Bible about this, right? That the Gentile gets the scraps from the table. Your dog's sitting there seeing that turkey leg up on the table, seeing that giant hunk of delicious baked meat. By the way, baked ham is for Christmas. Turkey is Thanksgiving. Baked ham is Christmas. Let's not get it twisted. But give your dog a little bit of give it a couple munches of it. You know what I mean? The dog deserves it. Cats, I leave up to you. Do cats even like people food like that? Do people feed cats from the table?
Yeah, anytime, because me and my girlfriend have a cat, and anytime with like chicken or even like a little piece of pizza, you can give it to him.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
There's something new every day. I don't even know. I don't spend much time around cats. Anyway.
And as I've watched the field, many of them friends develop and offer their message. I do sense that there's still space for what I offer. And in fact, as I've gotten out and around over the course of the last 10 days or so, I think that path is even wider than I imagined.
I think Deval Patrick's the only one who thinks there's a wide path for him to run for president. I'm just going to put that out there. There was a photo that was circulating over the weekend of Deval Patrick at an event for Deval Patrick, and there was nobody there. Nobody. So they had to cancel the event because no person showed up to the event. I think they said that there were two who walked in and were like, we're not going to be the only two people here. So that's pretty much, I think, all you need to know about Deval Patrick's chances of winning the presidency. I know that this is going to be the big topic for everybody. If you're going to talk politics at the Thanksgiving table, the big topic will likely be the 2020 election and who the best Democrat candidate will be for the who would be the best candidate or who would be the most likely to win, perhaps. If you're a Republican, you're probably more likely to focus on that. I'm still putting my money on Elizabeth Warren, folks. And I'm pretty confident, welcome back, Tim, pretty confident that my Elizabeth Warren prediction is going to be wrong. My Biden prediction, I think, is going to be correct, that he's not going to be the nominee, but I still don't know who is going to be the one who steps forward when it's not Biden. It feels like Elizabeth Warren, but her whole Medicare for all debacle, where she said she was going to pay for it without making anybody else have to pay for it and all these different things. Elizabeth Warren, she's got problems, obviously, with her candidacy. There are issues that I think are going to continue to face her, even on the left. And just the fact, I know we were talking about Native Americans and the Thanksgiving holiday earlier on the show, but just the fact that she has been able to continue on as a viable candidate despite the fact that she engaged in a multi-decade-long racial fraud is pretty stunning. Democrats seem fine with this. Remember, same people who are telling you Trump lies, Trump has a problem with the truth, you can't trust him and all this stuff, have no problem. Never mind Hillary Clinton, who is in the pantheon of corrupt and dishonest politicians. There's something particularly, for me at least, there's something particularly odious about the way the news media has covered up for Hillary Clinton all these years and the ways that she's. I know you all agree. That's nothing particularly new or different. But you know who they're really bashing these days? It's really got all the Democrats a little bit in a foul mood. Michael Bloomberg, because he's gonna. I think that here's his play. I've been thinking about this a lot more last night. Well, actually, wait, no. First, let's do the bashing, and then we'll get into what his play is. For example, we have Elizabeth Warren.
So I am here on day 2 of Michael Bloomberg's $37 million ad buy. Michael Bloomberg is making a bet about democracy in 2020. He doesn't need people, he only needs bags and bags of money.
This has been disproven so many times, and it's a thing that politicians can only say because they think that their constituencies aren't very bright. Like Elizabeth Warren knows that Jeb Bush spent a vast sum of money and lost the primary, didn't even get close to winning the primary in the 2016 election, that Hillary Clinton dramatically outspent Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, as we know, winning. Yet here we are. She's still saying this, that somehow Bloomberg might be able to buy the election, that Michael Bloomberg would be in a position to just run off with this thing because he's got bags of money to spend on it. And he's not the only one. You got Bernie Sanders, who is very upset. You got another billionaire in the race. The billionaire class is destroying America by engaging in capitalism that creates tremendous prosperity and thousands of jobs. Can we have a little bit of the Bernie Sanders vibe on the show, producer Brandon? Clip one, please. Clip one.
And what he believes, and this is the arrogance of billionaires. Hey, I can run for president because I'm worth $55 billion. And maybe I'll take $1 billion out of that $55 billion, not a lot when you're worth that much. And I'm going to start running a massive amount of TV ads in California and, in fact, all over this country. And I think that is precisely one of the factors that is undermining American democracy.
Undermining democracy. People being able to use their private property to spread their message is undermining democracy. It is not undermining democracy. But really what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders want is mobocracy, oclocracy. Just get the masses riled up on an issue. Don't let them, it doesn't matter if they know what you really stand for. It doesn't matter if the math you're trying to sell them on doesn't add up. Just do whatever you've got to do in order to get the votes you have to get to be in power to further push America down the very destructive path of socialism. And this is where I think Bloomberg really comes in. I've been thinking more about this. I don't think Bloomberg really believes he's going to be president. I don't see it. He seems like a smart enough guy to know he's not going to win the presidency. But maybe that's not really his ultimate purpose here. I think if he could win, he would take the job and he would do it. I'm not saying that, but I think he views this as a two-pronged thing. One is the vanity project of running for president given the very, very weak field. Okay, fine. And also, I think he sees what Donald Trump did after all the years that he said he was going to run, and then finally he runs and he wins. But I believe that Bloomberg understands that there's a real threat to everything that the Democrats believe in that comes from the openness and the intellectual flimsiness, but the openness about the socialism that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are pushing. Not that they couldn't win. I think that, unfortunately, especially if we hit a major financial downturn, and this is part of my concern for next year. I've said I have there's something ominous that just I'm concerned. Things can't stay the way they are right now going into the election. Something's going to happen. If you hit a very bad economic stretch in the election year, who does that benefit the most? It certainly benefits Democrats against Trump, there's no question. Then all of a sudden you'll have news coverage of, the economy and unemployment's going up, and the economy, then all of a sudden it'll be the biggest story in the country every day. I'll flood the zone, even if it's a pretty moderate downturn, even if it's just a cyclical, okay, well now we got to kind of get some of the excess and get some of the bad money out of the system, so to speak. I mean, just sort of let things reset. Even with that, they'll turn it into the biggest news story in the country, and they'll say that this is a repudiation of Donald Trump. But the people in the Democratic primary who would benefit the most from this are the far left, the socialists. People get scared and they turn to the government to save them. People decide that when things get really bad, they never look at root causes and government overspending and intervention and monetary policy and all the things that can make a downturn certainly much worse, if not be the primary cause of a downturn in the economy, the cyclical nature of these things. And there are people that I know who would argue that we shouldn't have to have these cyclical downturns, and that this is the result of monetary policy and central planning of our economy by the, people that just study this their whole lives go back and forth on this, and I'm not really one of them, although I think that central planning is always something you want to do the bare minimum of, just like I think government is something you want to have very clearly delineated and limited. This goes back, of course, to our founding philosophy, but I think that should be the case as well from the perspective of government intervention in the economy. It should be the absolute minimum necessary, really just the enforcement of contracts and the bare minimum of regulation, and that's not what we have now. But if you were to have a market that all of a sudden becomes really choppy and people get scared and bad things are happening, then you would see, I think, a big surge in support for the far left of the Democrat Party. Remember that it was when socialism had a big rise in this country as a result of the Great Depression. The narrative was that capitalism had failed. In fact, some of the traitors to this country, who were people who were communists, who were doing the bidding of the Soviet Union, and yes, they existed. Yes, that was real. They still pretend like we don't have more than a mountain of evidence, which we do, that there were Soviet penetrations of the United States government at a very high level, but also that there was there were efforts from the Soviet Union to infiltrate socialism and, yes, communism into this country, but there was an openness to it. The fellow travelers of the Communist Party in Moscow, in this country, believed that capitalism had failed. And they looked around, they saw all this economic devastation and said, see, we need a system where the government will make sure that we are fed and everything is fair and everything will be better. That became a belief that was really easy for people of good intention initially to support. And so when people get scared, they don't look at the government and say, what did you do? They look at the government and say, how could you help me? So if we head into a bad economic period in the next year, you will see a big surge in support for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and anybody who is far left on the Democrat spectrum and promising a whole lot of free. The free stuff candidate becomes, even though you can afford it even less with a bad economy, the free stuff candidate becomes very, very popular very quickly when all of a sudden everyone is scared. And that's where I think Bloomberg realizes that it's not a good idea for this country to go socialist. Bloomberg, who's a self-made multi-billionaire, understands that at some level. And perhaps he believes that his role here is just to make sure that whoever wins the Democrat primary, it's somebody that, at least at a basic level, believes in the benefits of capitalism. Has some understanding of what really works and how markets make our lives better and how markets bring about prosperity and do things for us as a people that we should all, yes, dare I say, we should be thankful for. We should be thankful for capitalism today. Thankful that we live in a country that is certainly imperfect and has far too much socialism and central planning going on, but is at least in some ways a better example than all of our near peers about how to pursue efficient markets and to empower the individual to make choices that benefit the individual, and then in the aggregate, those individual decisions that help that are based in self-interest create a better society around for all of the rest of us. They invent new things, they make good things, they help with things, they provide services that all of us benefit from. That is a lesson that I would hope that perhaps we could be talking about at the Thanksgiving table this year. That would be a better one. Tell the kids about why capitalism is great, and that's why you've got families all across the country that are going to be having a giant, I don't know, whatever, like a 20-pound bird or however big. How big are like the average turkey? I don't even really know. You know what I mean? How big are, like, if you get like a standard Thanksgiving turkey, it's like, isn't it like 15 pounds or something? They're big.
Did you see that video of the turkey following around the mail truck? to every single stop.
Oh, turkeys are terrifying.
Yeah, so they're big enough to do some damage.
Turkeys, you start to realize that, there's that whole, I don't know if that theory is still believed in, but that you had dinosaurs actually transitioned. And, this was like around the Jurassic Park era when people started saying that they transitioned.
Evolved to birds.
They've evolved into birds over time. You look in the eyes, you look at those little beady eyes of a turkey, and you're like, your great grandpa was probably a velociraptor.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, they look scary. They're mean, and they'll come after you. They'll chase you down. Other birds. You get too close to birds, you find out the hard way. They're not cuddly, and turkeys will chase you down. They can be very very aggressive, and they are ugly too. They're one of the. If you're thinking like, what is the ugliest animal in the world? I think turkeys have got to be kind of up on that list, and they're really. And they do, you think about like buzzards. I think that buzzards and vultures are very high up on the animals you don't want to be near and spend time around scale,
Yeah, they just look dirty all the time. And that goblet underneath, you don't know what's going on.
It's not cool, yeah. But they taste pretty good. So we're gonna be eating some turkey, and then we're gonna have some turkey sandwiches the day after that, and turkey for days and days and days. Good things, my friends.
I think the concern of this perspective that makes it sound like, it's all the fault of students of color or somehow their families, that they struggle to get ahead, when the reality is there are so many barriers that our system puts up. And I want to make sure I communicated that I'm very conscious of the advantages and privileges that I have had, not through any great wealth, but certainly through education, through the advantages that come with being white and being male. And that's part of why I know I've got to make myself useful as a candidate and as president.
Pete Buttigieg got into some trouble here with the Democrats because he tried to talk about education, and particularly education in minority communities and what could be done to improve things. And this is probably a surprise to none of you listening. But guess what? There are only certain things you're allowed to say when you're talking about minorities in education in America if you are a white male, period. But if you're a white male running for elected office, and the only things you're allowed to say, and this was established once again with Mayor Pete here, the only things you're allowed to say is systemic racism, barriers to minorities, more racism, and more resources needed because racism. That's it. You deviate from that as a Democrat. You go in any other direction. You talk about, look at what are charter schools? Which charter schools are public schools? It's just money it's just a different format for a public school. But anyway, people are, it drains money from public schools. Is a strange argument. But you're not allowed to have an open conversation about education when education is failing in so many underprivileged minority communities across the country. It's just sad. It's really troubling. The people that are supposed to be in positions of power that can do something about this or could come up with new ideas either are unwilling to or aren't allowed to. They're not allowed to come up with ideas to help. I mean, I know people that teach in schools here in New York City that are entirely as a function of the way the school is set up. Underprivileged backgrounds, people that have to be either from Section 8 housing, or I forget what the designation is, but they have received some form of welfare. The school's entirely minority. And I hear about what goes on at that school, and the problem is not resources. The problem is not a lack of computers or textbooks. I mean, these are things that you'll hear. The problem is not there's not enough money for teachers, or there's not enough teachers. Those are not the problems. Problems are... And this is from teachers I know in one school in particular here in New York City that's entirely underprivileged and minority. The problems are things like students are unwilling to listen to authority. They're unwilling to be silent when they're told that it's time for someone to present to the class, or they don't show up, or there are all these other issues that come up in the classroom, and there's no support for students to do their homework at home. This is what I hear from teachers all the time. But if you're a Democrat, you can't talk about any of that. If you're a Democrat, you know what the script is. What is the problem with education as it pertains to minority majority schools and minority neighborhoods where the test scores are very low and education is not succeeding. The answer is racism, 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 structural racism, and more racism. If you say anything other than that, you will be crushed by your own side as a Democrat, and that's just sad because you know who suffers as a result of that? Kids who cannot count on adults to have adult conversations about how to make the education system better for all kids, and in particular minority kids in this country. And this is the Democrats' fault. This is what they do.